the Nonprofit Podcast, powered by Donorbox.
Imagine this, a world where your nonprofit's mission isn't just a whisper, but a resounding call for transformation. A place where your efforts don't just scratch the surface, but strike at the core of societal change. Sound inspiring? Well, that's what nonprofit advocacy is all about, and today we're here to unpack it all. Welcome to the Nonprofit Podcast. I'm Jena, the nonprofit advocate here at Donorbox. We are here each week with practical actions you can use today to take your nonprofit to the next level tomorrow. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Lindsey Baker-Bauer, our marketing content writer here at Donorbox. Lindsey is not only a skilled writer, but also an educator and a seasoned nonprofit professional. With years of experience, she's been instrumental in assisting arts nonprofits with their fundraising messaging and strategic approaches. Lindsey wrote an incredibly informative article on nonprofit advocacy for the Donorbox nonprofit blog, and that's what sparked the fire for our conversation today. Lindsey, it's a pleasure to have you here. Welcome.
Thanks, Jena. I'm excited to talk about this.
Me too. So let's kick things off by getting straight to the heart of it, nonprofit advocacy. Can you break down this concept for our listeners? Why is it so important for nonprofits to engage in advocacy efforts?
So nonprofit advocacy is all about taking deliberate actions to support and amplify a nonprofit's mission in the public sphere. So it goes beyond just providing services. It's about actively seeking change. So advocacy empowers nonprofits to influence policies, shape public opinion, and really drive change that aligns with their mission. And it's a way to address the root causes of societal issues and not just the symptoms.
We hear the terms advocacy and lobbying used interchangeably sometimes. Could you help us draw a clearer line between the two and perhaps share some good examples that can help our listeners understand the distinction better?
Absolutely. That's a really good question. Advocacy and lobbying share a lot of similarities. So often nonprofits have a really hard time determining which actions are acceptable and allowed. Advocacy is all about informing and educating. So you're informing, you're educating lawmakers, stakeholders, and the general public about your organization's mission and the issues that you're passionate about. So it's about raising awareness, creating a dialogue, and mobilizing people to take action. For instance, a nonprofit advocating for better environmental policies might organize public awareness campaigns or run educational workshops or host community events, things like that are geared towards education. On the other hand, lobbying involves more direct attempts to influence specific legislation or government decisions. It often includes activities like meeting with elected officials to discuss a particular bill, urging them to vote in a certain way, or sometimes even drafting legislation. So let's imagine a nonprofit working to improve access to healthcare. If they directly meet with lawmakers to support a bill that addresses healthcare disparities, that's lobbying.
Thanks for clearing that up. I want to move on to the ever important topic of IRS guidelines. Deep sigh here. So navigating these can be a bit overwhelming for some nonprofits. Could you break down for our listeners, what are the main things nonprofits need to keep in mind to ensure that their advocacy efforts stay well within the boundaries set by the IRS?
I think this is why so many nonprofits are really nervous around the topic of advocacy, because understanding IRS guidelines is so crucial for nonprofits to maintain their tax-exempt status while still engaging in that important advocacy work. So for organizations with a 501c3 designation, it's important to avoid what the IRS calls, quote unquote, political action. So while advocacy can be a major part of your nonprofit's mission, you need to avoid significant action that appears politically motivated. Instead, you're focusing on educating the public about your mission and why taking action is so important. And believe it or not, nonprofits can actually participate in a small amount of lobbying. And this is where it gets really tricky. The IRS defines lobbying as attempts to influence specific legislation. And while it's allowed to some extent, it can't be a nonprofit's sole mission. So this means lobbying needs to be kept to activities within a quote unquote insubstantial limit. So it can't become the organization's primary function or use up a significant amount of its resources, its budget, things like that.
I can see where that gets a little confusing for folks, but I think that helps clarify it a little bit. Of course, since this is the nonprofit podcast, our listeners likely consist of those 501c3 designations, right? So could you go a bit deeper into how this specific designation impacts a nonprofit's ability to engage in these advocacy efforts or activities?
So the 501c3 designation is often associated with charitable organizations that are dedicated to educational, religious, scientific purposes, things like that. So while these organizations are indeed allowed and encouraged to engage in advocacy, they need to ensure that their advocacy efforts align with their charitable purpose and mission. The IRS emphasizes that any political activity should be kept to a minimum and should not become the primary focus. This balance ensures that, nonprofits stay true to their charitable nature while still doing that important work and advocating for change as long as it aligns with their mission.
And you mentioned that nonprofits can engage in this quote unquote insubstantial lobbying. Could you provide a glimpse into what this might look like with some examples? I guess something you've seen?
Yeah, a good example with a organization that uses Donorbox, the Hispanic Access Foundation. They host their annual Latino Advocacy Week where their supporters actually do meet with lawmakers in Washington, D.C. to champion legislation and advocacy efforts that uplift and support Latino communities around the United States. So this is a kind of gray area where they are performing an important aspect of their mission by attempting to influence that legislation without directly lobbying themselves. They're inviting advocates to do it on their behalf. Plus, this annual Advocacy Week is really only a small part of the Hispanic Access Foundation's many programs, including scholarships, environmental conservation efforts, and so much more than that. So their Advocacy Week activities are considered insubstantial lobbying because they contribute to the nonprofit's mission without becoming their primary activity.
Okay, so looking at the practical side of things, for our listeners who are eager to roll up their sleeves and launch an advocacy campaign of their own, what do you think are the key steps they should take to plan and execute a successful campaign that aligns with their nonprofit's mission?
That's a great question. I think you start with a strategic approach. It's important to define a SMART goal. And Jena, you've probably heard this acronym before. It stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. It's a strategy many nonprofit leaders use to make these really clear and concise goals to outline, what you want to achieve through your advocacy efforts. And this will serve as your guide throughout the campaign. You can refer back to it and make sure you're on the right track.
That is a great place to start. Very familiar with these SMART goals. And we've actually got a great Donorbox blog on setting SMART goals that I'll make sure we link in today's show notes as well.
Great. That's awesome. And after setting those SMART goals, your next step is to tap into your existing network to identify those that can advocate on your behalf. Engaging supporters really begins with data-driven insights. Dive into your donor data to identify individuals who have demonstrated that deep interest in your cause. Pull those reports, look for those who have supported specific campaigns. Maybe they've donated frequently, they've attended all of your events, or they volunteer. So depending on your goal, your advocates might even be other nonprofits or local organizations too, like schools or churches. These individuals are more likely to be receptive to your advocacy message and get involved. So once you've identified those potential advocates, you need to personalize your outreach. Craft some compelling stories and messages that really emphasize how their involvement in your advocacy efforts can make a tangible impact. Show them, how their support aligns with their values and beliefs, and make them feel like partners in creating that positive change.
Another crucial aspect to consider is funding, right? It's the fuel that propels your mission and your advocacy forward. You'll need to create materials to educate the public about your advocacy and also cover the expenses of events and advertising and all that other stuff too, right? A really good way to fuel your campaign and get those funds coming in is by leveraging the tools that you have available through Donorbox. So I'll jump in and say one avenue to explore here is using crowdfunding campaigns for your advocacy. You can craft and share captivating narratives that draw those potential supporters in. So it's not just about transactions in this situation, right? It's about weaving that story that resonates, as you said, Lindsey. And then you can also turn that crowdfunding campaign on Donorbox into a peer-to-peer campaign to extend your campaign's reach by enabling those supporters that you found right within your network to fundraise for your advocacy campaign. So now your supporters become your fundraisers to really amplify this campaign and this mission.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Crowdfunding is a really popular choice for these advocacy campaigns, I think, because, like you said, it's story driven. It connects with the power of the crowd, which, is a very sort of grassroots effort to make real change. And then peer to peer can really mobilize your supporters and expand your reach. So, yeah, those are two fantastic tools for an advocacy campaign.
Cool. Okay, so what's next? Where do our listeners go from here? What about staying connected throughout this advocacy campaign, whatever the lifetime of that may be?
It can be tricky to know how to proceed. So I think as you embark on this advocacy journey, it's important to navigate with that clear strategy in mind. And so that's where planning your touch points comes into play.
Planning touch points. Okay. Could you elaborate on what exactly touch points are in this context and how they contribute to the success of an advocacy campaign?
So touchpoints are the strategic interactions you have with your supporters throughout your advocacy campaign. They're interactions that can take really many different forms, and they're things that you're already probably doing, like hosting impactful events, crafting compelling emails, sharing that social media content that's going to engage your advocates. So think of them as the milestones that keep your campaign momentum alive and your message at the forefront.
So touch points are like checkpoints that ensure that your campaign is staying in front of supporters and maintaining meaningful engagement. Why are these so crucial?
Touchpoints, they really serve as sort of the bridge between your mission and your supporters' involvement, their heart. They help you forge those deeper connections and keep your advocates motivated. Plus, they provide consistent opportunities for your advocates to take action. So they get to feel really involved and develop that relationship with your organization. They create a sense of community, and they, make your supporters into active participants in the advocacy journey.
As nonprofits plan their touch points, what are some practical steps they can take to ensure that these interactions are not only impactful, but aligned with their mission?
Planning your touch points strategically is key, I think. You can start by identifying the most effective channels for reaching your supporters. So whether that's through events or emails or social media posts, you can really tailor those messages to connect with your audience on a personal level. Like we said, personalize, personalize, personalize. You can highlight the direct impact of their involvement, but also always be ready to adapt. You can monitor the progress of your campaign and be willing to adjust your touch points based on how things are evolving.
Okay, so flexibility and intentionality here. I'm sure our listeners are eager to know. We certainly get this question a lot from our Donorbox Academy students. How do nonprofits balance that frequency of touch points without overwhelming their supporters, right? They don't want to spam people or make them tired of hearing this mission. So where's the balance there?
It is a delicate balance for sure. The key, I think, is to be really mindful of your supporters' preferences and communication habits. So regular, consistent touch points, they will keep your campaign alive in your supporters' minds, but overloading them too much can actually have the opposite effect and can lead to disengagement. So if you utilize a mix of touch points, some more frequent, like social media updates, and others maybe a little bit more strategic, like personalized emails. If you do that, you'll always give your supporters the option to adjust their communication preferences. And I think that's where segmentation is really key.
We talk about segmentation a lot, and I think that can be tricky too. So if you're not sure what your supporters' communication preferences are, you can send out a donor survey. Ask them point blank how they want to be communicated with, and you can really make a plan from there.
Yeah, the golden rule of Touchpoints is really quality over quantity. So each interaction should carry that meaningful message and a really clear call to action. Supporters want to know how they can help, how they can get involved. So then you're focusing on building relationships, inspiring that action, and showcasing the impact of advocacy. And that makes for more meaningful connection. And remember, every touch point is an opportunity to transform a supporter into a real champion for your cause. So keep that in mind as you craft your touch points, that you're trying to inspire that level of connection with your cause.
If you're communicating and your readers, your supporters are taking in all this information, like, great, this is great information, but what do I do? You don't want them to walk away wondering what they were supposed to do with that. So that clear call to action will really mobilize. So before we wrap up, could you share with our listeners one practical action that they can take away to start their journey towards effective nonprofit advocacy, even if they haven't planned a campaign yet?
For those nonprofits that are just dipping their toes into the advocacy waters, a practical step you can take is, begin building those relationships with key stakeholders and with your community partners. That's going to be your step one. Reach out to other organizations, local community leaders, individuals who share your passion for change, and start conversations. Attend networking events and collaborate on smaller initiatives that align with your nonprofit's mission. And establishing these connections early on will really help pave the way for your future advocacy efforts. If you have that strong foundation of support, you'll be ready to launch your campaign.
Building those relationships is a fantastic way to set the stage for impactful advocacy for sure. There you have it, a wealth of insights and actionable strategies to hopefully ignite your nonprofit's advocacy journey. Lindsey, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and shedding some light on this topic.
Thanks for having me.
If you're hungry for more knowledge, head over to the show notes where we've got a fantastic Donorbox blog article waiting for you on strategic planning for nonprofits. This resource will be a good guide as you spend some time charting your course toward even greater success. Thank you for choosing to spend time with the Nonprofit Podcast. I hope you've left with the confidence to take a small step today that will make a big difference tomorrow. Don't forget to download and review the podcast or give it a thumbs up if you're listening to the Nonprofit Podcast on YouTube. Your review is a great way to help others find us. You're here to help others. We're here to help you. Until next time, stay inspired.
That warm feeling when you help someone, it's not just happiness, it's fulfillment. And we believe it should be available to everyone, from frontline heroes to first-time fundraisers. Our tools empower you to help others. This is our mission. This is Donorbox, helping you help others.